Looks like we're at the top of the hour. Hello and welcome to this presentation on Avatar, Identity with Intent. The purpose of this presentation is to think of identity as a choice. Understanding this approach can empower our actions and results in the virtual and natural world. I am James Neville of Online Media Service of Development One LLC, Texas, and my co-presenter is John O'Connor of Technological University, Dublin. John and I teach learning in virtual reality for the Virtual Worlds International Student Project and programs. In this presentation, we will share principles and practices of identity with intent, taken from our actions teaching collaborative online engagement to university students as avatars in a 3D virtual reality environment. We will conclude with a recap and opportunity for discussion. We like to include interactivity in our teaching. Please take a piece of paper and a pencil and draw a line top to bottom, dividing it into two columns. Label the first column what the presenter says. Label the second column my thoughts and responses. As you listen to our presentation, please feel free to jot notes on what we say and on what you think about it in the two columns. Bicameral note-taking and find it helpful in maintaining focus and relevance. Principles and Practices, Part 1. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Sitearm. We have a writer in Ireland called Moncán McGann, whose name has no direct English translation. He writes primarily in the Irish language, and in his recent book, 32 Words for Field, he talks about spending summers in rural County Kerry as a child. Irish remains the first language in that part of the island, and the locals would greet him with "Nach tú," which literally means, "Isn't it yourself?" He would answer, "Is me, it's me," and adds that although I was never all that certain who I was, I envied the locals their sense of certainty. To reflect on who we are, and more particularly to think about the idea of self, we really need to begin by contemplating the nature of reality. There are various lenses through which reality can be considered: scientific, religious, philosophical, or artistic, for instance. It may even be said that the true purpose of life is to come to some understanding of reality. This is what Socrates intended, according to Plato, when he claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Plato also acknowledged that this examination is far from simple. In his allegory of the cave, he proposes that seeking the truth is a painful process and is also an individual journey that, once embarked upon, does not permit a return to previously comforting beliefs. Currently, as explained by theoretical physicist Sean Carroll, scientists actually spend more time thinking about what they do not know about the nature of reality rather than what they do know. He suggests the world appears to us in layers rather than in one single unified thing. Thus, there are different ways of talking about reality. For example, in one layer, a chair can be described in terms of its physical manifestation, as a materialistic object with shape and form. He says it is made of cloth and fabric and wood and metal. In another layer, the chair is a collection of atoms of elementary particles held together by the laws of physics. He concludes that the feature of reality that is worthy of our consideration is that there are many overlapping, seemingly different, but ultimately compatible ways of talking about it. Alan Wallace, the noted Buddhist and scholar, quotes the early American pioneer in psychology, William James, who said that what we attend to is what we wind up taking to be real, and that which we don't attend to fades out. Wallace is concerned that the weakness with modern science is that we have overlooked the nature of the observer. It would be completely inaccurate to suggest that he equates the observer directly with the self, but his proposition affords the opportunity to explore the self and think about how identity arises. Daniel Dennett tells us, what makes the self is a whole big collection of memories and projects and plans and likes and dislikes, a psychological profile. Faced with a complicated living human being, we try to make everything cohere around a single point, that's the self, the center of narrative gravity. He believes that this only seems to be consciousness, but it does not follow that there actually is consciousness. In fact, he is adamant that the self is an illusion. On the other hand, philosopher Galen Strawson suggests Dennett's position is provably false. He argues forcibly that our experience of consciousness cannot in fact be denied, and he wonders if it is not the incompatibility with physics that leads Dennett and others to say consciousness must be an illusion. And, as if all of this doesn't make it hard enough for us to understand who we really are in the natural world, when we join Second Life, we are required to develop yet another identity in the form of an avatar. At first, this may seem quite straightforward. We start by selecting a name, then choosing a look from a selection of avatar archetypes. It is only as we become settled residents that questions of identity begin to bubble up in earnest. Do I want my avatar to reflect my natural world identity or something completely different? Will I be exploring an aspect of my personality that might not be possible to do in the natural world? Some people, like me for instance, try to bring our natural world identities into Second Life by designing avatars that match our physical selves as closely as possible. Perhaps this is because my main reason for being here is to teach, and therefore my avatar requires the use of my credentials from the natural world. But let's be honest, most residents come here to explore a second life, to reinvent themselves in some way. There can be many reasons for this, but the result is usually the same. They prefer to remain anonymous, perhaps to all but a few close friends. Virtual worlds afford the opportunity to explore different personas, different personalities, different selves, in a relatively safe environment, and perhaps even without consequences. Nevertheless, identity, and the development of self, ourself, is not without repercussions. It is a continuous process rather than a single act. And while much of it takes place in our subconscious, it is our contention today that our identity is not entirely outside our control. In ancient classical theatre in Greece and Rome, actors held different wooden masks up to their faces to project characters. The masks were known as personas, leading to our use of the term today. We all use different personas depending on the social situation in which we find ourselves. The person we are when at home with family is not necessarily the same one who goes to work, who socializes with friends, or the individual who attends events such as this. And the private self may well be one that is not revealed to anyone else. These personas are developed over a lifetime in response to social engagements and interactions, frequently without a conscious decision, but somewhat automatically in the subconscious part of the mind. Our identity, then, is composed of these many personas. The Lebanese-French writer Amin Maalouf opens In the Name of Identity with a question. So, am I half French and half Lebanese? He answers, of course not. I haven't got several identities. I've just got one. He asserts that identity isn't given once and for all. It is built up and changes throughout a person's lifetime. This echoes the concept of conjugating identity, given to me by Awam Amka, the Nigerian playwright and professor of drama at the Tisch School of the Arts in New York. I like this notion of identity because it encompasses the continual recitation of ourselves, while recognizing the self as a composite of many personas. Now let's consider the term avatar for a moment. It was first introduced to the digital game space in the 1980s by Richard Garriott, developer of Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar. He later explained that he wanted the player to respond to what are called moral dilemmas and ethical challenges, as they would personally respond. The character you were creating in the game, I wanted to be you, not your alter ego. He intentionally appropriated the ancient Sanskrit term that describes the manifestation in the physical world of a deity from the spiritual realm, recognizing it as a perfect fit for the game. As we know, Neil Stephenson went on to popularize the term in his 1992 novel Snow Crash, which also introduced the term metaverse, by the way. And it is now used commonly to describe our digital manifestations in most online virtual applications. Garriott may have unwittingly bequeathed us an important approach for interacting with technology. The inherent power vested in the term is a reminder that our tools, no matter how complex or sophisticated, are our own conceptions. One of my colleagues, philosopher Noel Fitzpatrick, notes the origin of the word technology in ancient Greek, techne, meaning a system or a method of making or doing, an art or a craft, a practice or a technique. This supports the broader understanding of technology, not just as a tool, but more importantly, as a form of becoming human. Through techne, which is all forms of techniques and practice, we become who we are, both as individuals and as a society. An avatar permits embodiment, and facilitates intervention in a virtual world or in virtual world environments, thereby affording the opportunity not only to explore the virtual, but also to consider what it truly means to be human, whether inhabiting the natural world or virtual environments. Understanding the fluidity of identity as something we can intentionally affect, develop, and even choose can be simpler in virtual worlds. The very name Second Life offers that coveted opportunity to start over again, erasing the mistakes of the past and taking on a fresh persona. While it is important to recognize the influence that a lifetime of conjugating identity has upon us, the act of inhabiting an avatar provides the possibility of intentionally adopting a new persona. The act of observing our avatar in the virtual space gives just enough sense of distance to allow conscious self-determination to get a foothold. This powerful phenomenon, in which the behavior of an individual within virtual worlds is changed by the characteristics of their avatar, is recognized in psychology as the Proteus effect. In 2007, Nick Yeh and Jeremy Bailenson demonstrated this effect, and the results of their studies showed embodiment produced more significant behavioral changes than mere observation of the same visual stimuli. These findings support the claim that our avatars provide a unique lever to behavioral change. In my teaching here in Second Life, I use the exploration of identity as a starting point for discussing responsibility. University students are in the process of becoming citizens who will contribute to the development of society, and thus the development and refinement of an approach to responsibility is essential, not only for their benefit, but for society. And increasingly, this means a global society. We consider responsibility from three distinctly related perspectives: personal, professional, and social. I think this is such a fundamental aspect of their education that it requires direct confrontation. So, in addition to looking at what we mean by identity, one of the other tools I use in the class is fiction. Students are given the short story, The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin, to read in advance of the class. The story is a wonderful allegory from 1973 that is as fresh today as when it was written, and it allows for a gradual sense of realization to dawn. It doesn't offer any solutions, but it confronts us with a very difficult social and ethical problem. Just like the protagonists in the story, we can choose to ignore, accept, or walk away. This provides students with a tool to use in their own development of their selves, their identities, and their understanding of responsibility. This all leads to our belief, Sitearm's and mine, that identity with intent is about the power or knowledge leading to awareness and resulting in action. Back to you, Sitearm.
Thank you, John. Principles and Practices, Part 2. Avatar, identity with intent, rests on a foundation of self-perception as conversations in physical, emotional, and cognitive realms. These conversations are language statements, of which half are inherited and half are potentially self-spoken. Our physical bodies are fully capable of self-speaking. As extensions of our physical bodies, our avatars are also capable of self-speaking. The potential for self-speaking gives us the opportunity to enhance the quality and interactions of our lives, to more fully create expressions in physical reality of ideas and feelings we first imagine and experience in mental reality. Identity as avatar. Perceiving in practice the fluidity and power of our ability to self-speak ourselves is perhaps easier to comprehend when we create and operate as our own avatars. This experience of freedom can reflect back to reshape our experience of our physical existence. The writer Jane Roberts wrote that we create our own reality. It might better be stated, we create our own experience of reality. We create our experience of reality through how we move, feel, think, act, and speak. Speech acts. The entrepreneur Fernando Flores created workshops called Conversations for Action, based on his work with computer language and the language theory work of J.L. Austin and John Searle. Flores' work was influential in the development of the modern coaching industry. Conversations for Action coached participants in distinguishing speech acts such as promises, requests, assertions, and declarations. I have found these action statements useful in working with myself and others. Ontological self-speaking. My experience and practice rely heavily on the learnings and experiences of many practical seminars, workshops, and trainings. I put my focus on trying and testing what works. I adjust as needed and add effective techniques to my body of practice. I blend many models into a multi-tool hybrid toolkit. So in my work, I have come to see myself and others as ontological beings existing in the realm of self-speaking. Identity is fixed and fluid. Our existence as physical and emotional beings is relatively fixed, frozen, by the biological bodies and socioeconomic circumstances into which we are born. This physical and emotional existence is somewhat subject to positive change through exercise, habits, migration, and the trusted counsel of others. Our existence as ontological beings is relatively fluid, flowing. It is based on language statements open to personal awareness and adjustment. This ontological existence is highly subject to positive change through awareness of our inner declarations, through training, practice, and the trusted counsel of others. Our power lies in awareness of where we have something to say about it. This is identity by declaration. We have the ability to edit what we say about ourselves. On a sheet of paper, draw a vertical line. Label the first column, what other people say about me. Label the second column, what I say about myself. Identify some positive things others have said about you and jot them down in the left column. Now identify some negative things others have said about you and jot them down. Identify some positive things you say about yourself and jot them down in the right column. Now identify some negative things that you have said about yourself and jot them down. Look over what you have written in the left column. This is your public persona. It is how you are perceived by others. Look over what you've written in the right column. This is your private persona. It is how you are perceived by yourself. This is an example of your ontological identity, expressed in words. It is a dynamic, self-maintaining, intertwined ball of threads of conversation, some mutually supporting and some mutually contradictory, adding and dropping and changing as we go through life experiences. What we say about ourselves in this inner dialogue is editable. However, our ontological identities pretty much roll along as is until there is an impetus for change. This impetus can be external from others, or it can be internal from ourselves. When you edit your inner dialogue, you will still have to follow through with actions and results in your outer dialogue. One tip is to let people know about your new self and have them begin to reflect it back at you. This way it begins to show up in the public persona column as well. Here is a personal example of self-editing. On the left side are labels I have heard applied to me in the past. On the right as well is what I have to say about it. While I acknowledge the critiques on the left, I give my attention to the declaration on the right, and I act in the public world to make the private declaration real. Application, identity, and team roles. I use conversations for action and ontological principles in working with teams through coaching students to operate as effective team members. I see all my students as having the potential to be effective leaders. I define a leader as someone who sees what's missing like a possibility and speaks it into existence. I see a new group of students, none of whom are responding in class when asked to speak up. I see that their leadership is missing like a possibility, and that my goal over the next 8 weeks is to help them speak their leadership into existence. Behaviorally, I call on each one of them until they at least say or type something, and then I acknowledge them and thank them. Their self-conversation has moved from, I am not someone who speaks up in class, to, I am someone who can speak up in class on demand. The teams are asked to elect officers. Then the teams are each called to the front of the class. Each student is asked, who is the team leader? Some don't say a word, some speak up. I acknowledge them all no matter what they said or didn't say. Their self-conversation has moved from, I am someone on my own, to, I am someone belonging to a team. Sometimes I get a student who says, I guess I am the team leader, and I acknowledge them. From there on, their internal conversation has moved from, I guess I'm the team leader, to, I am the team leader. And I reinforce this new perception at every subsequent opportunity, introducing and referring to them to others as the red team leader, the blue team leader, the green team leader, and so on. Let me be clear. I don't tell the students all of this background that I'm telling you. I learned that it sunk in better through live fire exercises for students to experience themselves as members of a team and to experience themselves as team leaders. But I am telling you the theoretical basis of my practice, because I enjoy sharing it, and I invite you to test this ontological point of view for application. At the end of each semester, we have a course debrief with the students and ask them, how did the course go for you? What did you like, and what did you wish? Frequently, students say, it was easier for me to speak as an avatar than it is in real life. So that gives a good example of the freedom of being an avatar. Interestingly, students also say, it was harder for me to speak as an avatar than in real life. So that gives a good example of the power of seeing yourself in more than one realm and realizing that you are a more fluid being than you may have realized. There are 9 teamwork roles identified by research as being effective in order to facilitate team progress. I think of these roles as optional masks or personas that I can choose to wear on one particular team and take off and replace with another mask on another team. In our student work, we have them elect a team leader and a communication coordinator on a formal basis. This covers 2 of the team roles. But we keep our eyes on them for those individuals who can act as specialists in building or communication skills or as reliable team workers. As the students become more familiar with each other, they begin to distribute who does what tasks amongst themselves. They are learning to see and express themselves as different and new personas than they have perhaps ever experienced before. Application Organization Development. I use conversations for action and ontological principles in strategic planning work with organizations through visioning sessions wherein I ask them to see what's missing like a possibility. In this case, the future of the organization does not yet exist. It could be forecast as more of the same of what we're doing now, or it could be visioned and created as something bigger that cannot yet be seen. I see the future existence of the organization as missing like a possibility, and I arrange live fire sessions for the officers to begin to self-speak and experience their group as a bigger, bolder entity, including but also expanding beyond what they have already achieved. I reinforce this new self-perception at every subsequent opportunity, introducing and referring to them to others as the evolving, world-class organization that they are. Identity is multimodal. In the physical realm, we experience ourselves and others through 9 to 21 senses and speech. In the avatar realm, we experience ourselves in sight, sound, movement, and words. But that is enough to open our perception of the ability to self-speak who we are. Creating an avatar is deliberate and requires thought. In doing so, we experience our identities and abilities as more fluid. We experience the opportunity to self-speak ourselves. We experience the power to take on bigger roles and challenges. We are avatars, identity with intent. Thank you for your attention. We open the floor to reflection and discussion. Val says identity with intent captures it. Clyte says fluidity of identity. Shiloh says I have always understood identity as something that is more than negotiated. Helena says I could identify with much of what we said and speaking identity into existence. Thank you. What else is on your mind, guys?
And if you have a comment or a question, please feel free to use voice.
Eclectic says EYE identity for me. Dee Dee says she thought about the inner critic when we talked about self-talk. Thank you. Val says information is fixed and fluid, and our avatars are part of that change. Pixel flesh and blood of code. Gentle says, I embody the difference between public and private personas as a person with a progressive disability, which has some invisible features. Shiloh says, Le Guin was enhanced by that story. She was raised in anthropology. Blue Barker talks about doing the identity exercise. And is the private persona not what we want to project? Okay, John, could you keep track of the chat? I'm going to respond to Blue Barker. So, Blue Barker, the thing that I've observed about the private persona statements on the right are we have a lot of negative talk as well as positive talk. And the training and practice and trusted others counsel is identify things that we say about ourselves that are perhaps negative and closed down and just acknowledge them. And a recurring conversation that a lot of people have, including me, is I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough at this. I'm not good enough at that. I'm not good enough at anything. I'm just a failure. So if any of you identify with that, that is an example of inner dialogue. And it's a declaration because we have the authority to say what we say about ourselves. Who else has that authority? And I like to tell people, when you say, I'm no good at this, you're just shooting yourself in the foot with a loaded gun called your mouth. So, yes, both positive and negative are in on the right. John, over to you. What are we getting?
Yeah, I want to pick up on what Jane Jetson says about alter egos. And somebody else has commented already. She references Beyonce and Taylor Swift, and then somebody goes on to reference the king of all of that, David Bowie. And then Shiloh says, yes, but I choose not to be defined by my disability as best as possible. And I think that's the key, is through intervening into the virtual world as an avatar, it gives one a choice, I think, to step back from our physical reality and reconsider who we are and who we might want to be. And iSky talks about the documentary Our Digital Selves, and how our avatars are ourselves, or my avatar is me, which goes on to talk quite a bit about that and the actual experience of it, because it's all well and good in theory. It's only if you begin to experience it that you get a sense of what we're talking about. And Helena Klama then talks about Matthew McConaughey, and he asks you to write down all the lies others have told you. In other words, the negative things. And then the lies we've told ourselves. And there is an element there of having to acknowledge that before you can begin to move on and change.
Okay, John, I'm going to catch up a little bit back too now.
Great.
Earlier, Jane Jetson, no, let's see, it was Shiloh says, I choose not to be defined by disability. So this is very much what I have in mind from my experience with Gentle's community. And she coached me, that's my word, that the difference between, and I think it was an exhibit that Guy put up, said to say, I am deaf, I am blind, I am handicapped, is a declaration that other people have said about us, and we have many bought into it. If you shift it and say, I have a hearing disability, I have a sight disability, or in my case, I do have a hearing disability, I have a physical disability, then your disability is no longer defining who you are. It's just something you have. Like, I have a left hand and I have a hearing disability, and then you are freer to move on with it. So good. Thank you for that comment.
Can I just add something to that Sitearm before we move on?
Of course.
We spoke about the AI quadrivium. We spoke about language and the different how language allows you to understand the world differently. And interestingly, just following on from what you're saying, in the Irish language, the construction is such that you can't say I am deaf. You have to say deafness is on me, or my ear can't hear. So you're already separating the disability from yourself just by the nature of the construction of the language. Over.
Okay. You just made me another thing is I love certain snarky comments, and the comment I heard from someone was, I'm a left brain thinker. And the snarky comment that someone said to them is, when I hear someone say I'm a left brain thinker, I know I'm listening to a person with half a brain. And it makes me laugh, but it's not a polite thing to say. Electra says that she has observed a lot of positive and negative thoughts, and it's important to acknowledge them. Right on, right on, right on. And I'll tell you all right now, I did not know what my negative thoughts were until, like I said, I went to some of these workshops, blah, 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 blah. It's not like you have to go into, I mean, they're just practical hands-on stuff like Conversations for Action. Oh my God. There's so many good comments here. It's the 37 unread messages. John, back to you. Just pick somebody.
I like I can't find a comment now, but Ice Guy says, for me, being deaf is part of my identity. And I think that's something that's very important to acknowledge also, is that we frame our own identities and form our identities. And for what one person might consider a disability, somebody else may not consider it a disability. And I think we have to acknowledge that too. So thanks for making that point, Ice Guy. I think it's very, very important.
I want to thank Jenel for desperately trying to transcribe what we're saying. And John, I want to just mention Lynn Darkwatch's comment. I've heard it
going on to it, yeah.
I know, between people who identify with their avatars and people who see their avatars as game pieces. We were at the presentation yesterday where they did research on avatar perception. Oh my God, I just wanted to tell them, why didn't you ask people if they have more than one avatar? In the freedom of Second Life is I have a public avatar and I have a private avatar. Now, just between you guys and me, it was always Sitearm no matter what, because that was my commitment coming in. But for goodness sake, you can have a private one that explores any parts of Second Life you want and nobody knows, or you can be the beast or the tiny you want, or you can be the public one that's reputable and comes to expert panel workshops and things. Like, oh my God, include that in your research question, please. Back to you, John.
Great. There's a really interesting comment here from Jane Jetson, referring back to AI and talking about research that's out now that large language models also have their own inner dialogue. And that's one of the considerations in prompt engineering with the AI, is that you can trap their thoughts, which give insight into how they're predicting their response to a user input. Mook Wheeler sent me some very interesting articles following the quadrivium on AI earlier in the week, which explain how large language models work and there are different ways of looking at them. The concern I have, again, goes back to language. So terms like artificial intelligence predispose us to think about AI as somehow working on a human level, when in fact it doesn't. Terms like AI hallucinations, which is when an AI produces a response that appears to be accurate, but in fact is just a lie or an untruth or an error, depending on how you want to label it. Again, gives the impression that somehow the AI has a human response and therefore it can make mistakes, when in fact that's not what's happening. It's not making a mistake, it's just following what its algorithm says and producing something that it doesn't understand. And that's why some things come out as false and some things come out as true. There's a lot of work to be done there in how we are going to discriminate as the AIs become apparently more clever.
Okay, I'm going to jump in a little bit. Clyde gave another example. Is she switched their inner identity from "I am a diabetic" to "I have diabetes." I totally relate to that. I hated for years to say anything about that. And then there's a YouTube link iClectic is sharing saying it enhanced the presentation, so we can look at that later. iSky is raising her paws. Shiloh agrees about declaration. Blah, 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 blah. And Lou Barker says something about a cultural twist. I think we're catching up, John. I think. Are we? Come on, guys. Flood us with some more. If we missed you, type it again. If we missed you, type it again. Over to you, John.
So Graceful notes that she is treated differently based on her SL age of my professional and private avatar. Professional one is 2 years old. Private one is over 16. That's interesting. Val is talking about her daughter who is researching parasocial relationships within AI. And she's going to be presenting, in fact, at Gentle Heron's Mental Health Symposium. An AI buddy is available 24/7, unlike humans. Yes, I think this is... So earlier I was kind of suggesting perhaps that this anthropomorphization of AI is a bad thing. I don't think it is. I think it's just something we need to be aware of, that if we are anthropomorphizing something, we shouldn't be lulled into the belief that this thing actually is human in some way. But that doesn't mean it can't be comforting, or it can't be helpful, or it can't be useful. So I think clear and truthful understanding is important in the first place, and then we can actually, with some clarity, decide how we're going to use any given tool that's presented to us.
I want to add a little bit onto that too, John. To me, the other really, another important thing here is all of us are up to so many projects in our life, many of which overlap as demonstrable by who's here now. But there are many, many people that we also interact with. Where am I going to go with this? Seeing yourself with a little more freedom has allowed me to connect with other communities of practice, even if it's just a teeny weeny little Venn diagram overlap, okay? So, and that's a personal goal. As you know, if I had my druthers, I would connect with all 8 billion people in the world. In fact, that is an inner declaration, which we could discuss another time. How to put that into conversations for action with action and follow-up, well, it's one reason I come present at these conferences. It's one reason I push my inner introvert into extrovert on demand. Anyway, to me, it's giving me power to my mission, and I tell you about all this to give you power to yours. Back to you, John.
So I see we're coming up to the end. One time, maybe just to look at one or two more comments. Mook Wheeler suggests the notion of comfort also plays a big part in change. The level of comfort experienced with moments of practice tends to initiate change or forestall it, whether it is emotional, cognitive, physical. comfort levels. And if one is fully comfortable with the situation, one is unlikely to do much about it. And as she says, she thinks this is more true of big decisions than small ones. And I think that's a really strong perception, that is the case, isn't it? We're always suggesting that we're better to get out of our comfort zones occasionally, because really, if you are comfortable, there's no incentive to change.
So I would like to thank
sir.
all of you for your wonderful responses and comments. John and I appreciate it so much. When we thought about doing this, it was like, oh my God, it was a gleam in the eye. So we're going to stick around here or somewhere. Look forward to following up with you. And John has a note card of references and stuff to send out. But I know that the stream team has already given us the cut sign. So we'll stay here. But officially, the formal part is over.
I think I've shared that note card with everybody, have I?
I see it.
Good. So let me add my thanks to Sitearms. We really appreciate you coming along and bearing with us and engaging. Thank you very much.